Hello! I'm here to wrap up the next 6 books that I've read in the month of May, so let's jump right into it in no particular order. So first off, Reread of Roomies by Christina Lauren. This follows Holland and Calvin. Holland is kind of lost in her life. She doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She's doing a job for the sake of doing that job. It allows her to work on her uncle's musical, which is something that she loves, but she also really wants to be a writer and things aren't really going her way. And also she has a bit of a crush on this busker she's discovered on the New York subway. And Calvin is said busker, but he's in the States illegally. He does not have a visa, and when he's offered an opportunity to perform on the West End, Holland decides to fake marry him so that he can legally stay in the US and work on the musical. This is an adult romance story. It's a reread, so you already know that I really enjoyed it. Towards the beginning of this month I just needed to reread a few light adult romances just to boost my mood a little bit, and this one did the trick. Then I finished off the Remnant Chronicles trilogy by Mary E. Pearson by reading The Beauty of Darkness. This one was quite the chunker, but I was actually reasonably happy with how the series ended up concluding. There was the usual amount of angst in this one, but I really honestly don't mind that. I really like the characters in this story. There were some bits at the very end that were a little bit unnecessary in my opinion, and perhaps the story would have been more powerful without those, but I can't really say any more about that because of spoilers. But I really enjoyed reading this series. I'm glad I picked it up. I'm glad I read it back to back because it definitely made more of an impact on me for that reason, and I do recommend picking this series up. It's nice sort of romance fantasy that's light to read and enjoyable, and the first book you're following a character who decides that she doesn't want to enter into the arranged marriage that her parents have arranged for her, so she runs away. But she's pursued by her would-be husband and an assassin, and we don't know which one is which, and there's lots of politics and things going on as well, so it's really enjoyable for that reason. I also carried on with the Founders trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is book 2, Shorefall. I read book 1 for the first time last January, and then I reread it at the beginning of the month in preparation for this instalment. This one is just as fast-paced as book 1. There's just as much going on. I read it quite slowly just because I think because I'm doing so much reading for my job at the moment, I'm finding reading outside of my job a little bit more challenging, which is why I've been so heavily reliant on audiobooks recently. But I decided to just read this physically, and I really enjoyed it. I think that there's just so much to love about this series. I'm not going to talk too long about this one because I actually spent quite a long time talking about it in my recent reading vlog, which I will link for you. But essentially, this is a heist story. We follow a main character in the first book. This is more of a summary of the first book than this sequel, but we follow a main character who's a thief, and she steals an artifact that gets her in all sorts of trouble, and the magic system is fascinating, and the lore is really deep and rich, and it's just a really absorbing epic fantasy series with great character work. So if you like character focused stories but you also enjoy plot, this is actually a really good combination of both. Then I of course continued with the Keeper of the Lost Cities series by Shannon Messenger. This is book 4, never seen, and we're sort of expanding things out even further. Politics are getting even more complicated. We've got lots of relationships that are changing and evolving, and it's really thoroughly enjoyable. I'm not going to carry on waxing lyrical about this particular series. I think you probably know by now that I'm completely obsessed. I also talked about this one a fair bit in that vlog that I mentioned before, so I'll leave it there, but I'm just in love with this series. Then I finished the Dark Vault, sort of. So I read the second book, which is the Unbound, which is not the conclusion to the series, but is the conclusion of the books that are available. Something went wrong in the publishing of this particular trilogy, and so book 3 has never and will never be released as far as I know. But as I mentioned in the vlog, because this was the other book that I read in that vlog, there's only sort of one thing that happens at the very end of this second book that tells you that there will be a book 3. So I'm just going to put that out of my mind, and everything else wraps up quite nicely. So if you, like myself, have been worried about picking up these 2 books because there's no conclusion, just know that there's enough of a conclusion at the end of the second book, and if you put that one thing out of your mind, everything else is really nicely wrapped up. So you shouldn't be afraid to pick this particular duology, which is what I'm going to call it, up. So the first book, you follow a character named Mackenzie, who is a keeper. A keeper is someone that prevents histories from coming into our world. Histories usually live in the library, and they can sometimes escape into the Narrows, and it's Mackenzie's job as a keeper to stop them from leaving the Narrows and entering our world. Histories are the manifestation of the memories that we create while we're alive, and they are stored in the library after we have died. And it's just really light, easy reading, urban fantasy with great characters. There's a little bit of teenage angst. There's a high school setting in the second one, which I personally really enjoyed, and I don't know, it was just something really comforting about reading this. It's quite tropey, I suppose, and quite predictable, but I really enjoyed the reading experience. And then finally we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was the book club book for my channel in the month of May, and I have seen various adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, but I'd never actually read the book before. So this was my first time reading, and I fully intended to read it only physically, but I did end up reading and listening to an audiobook version. And the reason for that was not because the language is difficult, because it really isn't actually. For a classic, the language is pretty straightforward. It's just that in our group discussion we'd been talking about sort of translating the language into modern day language, and it's really funny because it is, although this is a romance story, it is also satirical to a certain extent, because Jane Austen is offering a commentary on some of the really silly parts of the society of the time and its focus on money and marriage, and that's kind of the point of it. So it is funny in a lot of aspects, but I couldn't, once I had that idea in my mind, I couldn't stop myself from translating the text as I was reading it, and that was just making it really difficult to get through, because it was taking me so much longer because I was constantly translating it as I was reading it. So I decided to pick up the audiobook to basically stop myself from doing that and focus on actually enjoying the story, and I did really enjoy the story. I will say that the first sort of half of this particular book is not as good as the second half. I won't say that it's a slog necessarily, because I don't think that that's right. There is a lot of setup, but there's a certain letter that is sent and received, or given and received, in the middle of this book, and things really pick up after that, and I was particularly invested in what was happening after that scene happened, and after that point I couldn't put the book down. But getting to that point was a little bit of a struggle for me, I will admit. But on the whole, I really enjoyed reading Pride and Prejudice, and I also watched the 1995 adaptation with Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and it was even more, I've seen that a few times, but it was even more enjoyable watching it having now read the text, because a lot of the dialogue in the film or in the television series is directly from the book, and there's a lot that goes on in the minds of the characters that you just can't translate into cinema apart from the expressions on the faces of the actors, and once you've read the book you understand those expressions even more. So I found that really, really enjoyable, and I really loved reading this book, especially with some of you. It made it so much more of an enjoyable experience than it even would have been on its own. So thank you to everybody who participated in that. I really appreciated our discussions. And that's it. Those are the next 6 books that I read in the month of May. So let me know if you've read anything that you really enjoyed in May, and that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye!